What's up, Slender? How are you doing this week?
I'm doing well.
That's good. That's good. Hey, everybody. Welcome to episode 65 of the Ascendant Art Podcast. It's going to be a good time. We are definitely doing this show to get more content for shorts because that seems to be the best way for us to get views on YouTube. So, at least that seems that's what we were finding this week. What do you think of the performance of some of those shorts that we were running, Slender?
I mean, I feel like if we're going to get monetized, it's not going to be off the live show.
That's true. I agree. I don't think it's the live show that is going to be the secret sauce to monetization. Although it'll be one of those crazy things. We'll have the right rant at the right time, and my guess is that it'll be you ranting, and it'll probably take off probably around when Captain Marvel 2: The Marvels comes out. We'll unleash you on the Brie Larson YouTube algorithm and see if we can ride that to monetization like so many others did on the first one.
Okay. This is the Ascendant Art Podcast, and we've got some good stuff to talk about today. So let's not focus on the gloom and doom for this episode.
That's true. We 100% have to eat some crow because both of us had made some very negative comments about Dungeons and Dragons Honor Among Thieves. We went and saw it at a preview show last night on Thursday when it opened, and not to bury the lead, it's a good movie.
Yeah, against all odds.
Against the odds, against writers making silly interview comments, it just doesn't. I don't understand because the movie was much better than it was advertised, and it was definitely much better than what we were getting from the interviews from the people who helped make it. Why? And I don't know what the point of it was when it was actually a very solid movie. And the CGI was actually very well done compared to a Marvel movie that has come out in the last couple of years. It looked excellent.
Yeah. The CG work was pretty impressive, especially I think in the realization of some of the spells, some of the classic magic that you always think of when you think D&D. Very well realized.
And we're not the only ones who have very positive things to say about that. Because if you check in, we like to go pop over to Rotten Tomatoes sometimes, more to look at the audience score. Look at it, is a 92% audience score. That's
funny. Both those numbers have gone up since yesterday.
More people have had a chance to go see it, which is good. And so I don't want to be overly praising of the movie. It's not like a perfect movie. It's not the greatest movie. It's like a solid 6, 7 out of 10. But it's entertaining. It's a good time.
I'd give it an 8.
You'd give it an 8? Okay.
Maybe even an 8.5. There are places where I'll knock some points off, but when you consider that it is a D&D movie, it's set in the Forgotten Realms campaign setting, and it has to strike that balance between, cinematic storytelling and making you feel like it was a campaign that, players got together around a table to actually do. It does those things very well. So I mean, if this thing was Oscar bait, well, yeah, then it's a 6. You know, it ain't gonna be pulling down too many awards.
Well, I
Although,
mean,
honestly, for best special effects, I think it could easily dominate because Marvel hasn't done anything even nearly as visually striking as what they managed.
I thought the owl bear was a very good because that was done a couple times in the movie, so you get to see it more than once. So you would think you'd be able to be a little more critical of something like that because you get to see it from different angles and multiple scenes and lightings, and it was really well done. I'm not the biggest D&D lore person, but I do know that we talked about it and that they seem to also be pretty solid on the lore in terms of the character types, lands. They were mentioning different. I think Baldur's Gate, the where were the Red Wizards from? Wherever the evil country nation was.
The Red Wizards of Thay.
Yeah. So
And this story supposedly takes place sometime after the civil war that occurred in Thay, that eventually led to the entire country becoming a nation of undead.
that pretty much ends the Civil War. Whoever's
Well, it does. I can't deny that. Now, the way they described it in this movie made it seem like it happened rather quickly, all with one fell swoop. But no, there like the opening salvos were pretty brutal, but like there was a civil war that eventually led to the entire nation becoming a nation of undead. But they didn't fold. Like there was some serious fighting going on over it. The books that actually uh, describe the the whole thing are uh, I forget what it's called, but the book's names are Unclean, Undead, and Unholy. 3 different books. It's a trilogy, and it details the the events leading up to the breaking out of the Civil War, some of the political moves that Zaztam made along the way, some of the key figures that were fighting against Zaztam during his rise to power, like Aoth Fazim and the Griffin Riders, who eventually were forced to flee because, well, they lost. And they became a mercenary group called the Brotherhood of the Griffin. So that's a whole side story that goes like there's a lot of lore around the fall of Thay. So I was really glad that they touched on that and they kind of wove it in as part of this story.
how did you feel like the creatures were represented? I know we talked about it a little bit, but in turn, like the CG was definitely good, but in terms of the way they were used on screen in the world, do you think it was true to the lore that they were done well? Like, give you're my resident dungeon master over here, so I want to kind of get you to share your insights on how you thought that went.
Well, I mean, they didn't go too crazy on the creature side of the house. They did have some. You see them. You see most of the creatures that they had in the trailer, with some exceptions. But I thought everything looked pretty good visually. I don't know if displacer beasts. Those are the big 6-legged panther things with the tentacles on their shoulders that were using their tentacles like projectors to make versions of themselves appear somewhere else. I don't know if that's exactly how that works. Like that didn't quite work exactly the way I thought it would. The mimic that they run into, which if you've seen the trailer again, most of this is you can see it in the trailer. The treasure chest that tries to eat the barbarian. They're a little tougher than they were made out to be in this encounter in the movie. And then the only other thing that confused me a little was they had a gelatinous cube and it remained completely stationary, which was a little weird because gelatinous cubes can move on their own slowly, but they can move on their own. So I thought it was a little weird that it wasn't moving. So those ones were a little odd. The fat dragon that actually is a dragon, and the whole reason, if I remember correctly, that it's so fat is because it was actually like shackled for the longest time by like the Durger, and the Durger are like underdark dwarves, and when it was shackled, they would feed it and everything else, and its only job was to keep the forge fires going. It supplied fire for all of that civilization, which then eventually crumbled, and the fat dragon escaped and is just down there wandering about now.
Still fat.
Still fat.
So I did actually. I was going to ask you about that because I wanted to check. Like, is the fat dragon like an actual genuine lore thing? Because it seemed like they wouldn't just pull that out of nowhere. So now it's good to know that yes, fat dragon is a lore appropriate choice. Did you now the general storyline, it's basic. It's not anything, and it doesn't have to be more complicated. It's just, it's a, in this case, Chris Pine is the roguish thief leader, also a bard apparently. So um and he's just trying to get his daughter back. I think it's a fairly straightforward, easy way to get motivated. He also lost his wife, and he's, dealing with that too. So I don't need overly complicated motivations for the leads in a movie. So I appreciated that it was nice and basic, and it's something that pretty much any regular person can immediately support and understand as a reason why he's going to be doing the things he's doing.
Yeah, just looked it up because I could never remember, but that dragon's name is actually Themberchad.
That's the kind of name a fat dragon would have.
Yeah, Themberchad the fat dragon.
That's great. So I know that we were worried, and the one of the things that we harped on before the movie's released was the alleged emasculation of men and how the women would be doing everything. And I actually I don't really have a problem with how anything in the movie went down. I know that I've heard some other people still say that they felt like there was a little bit of modern sentiment in the fact that Michelle Rodriguez playing Holga. Holga? Was it Holga or Holga?
I thought it was Holga.
Holga. Playing Holga was the muscle, but in D&D, a barbarian is going to be the strong person of the group. It doesn't matter whether it's a man or a woman.
Yeah, I don't know what the hell the writers were talking about in that fucking interview, if I'm honest. Like,
And with Chris Pine's character class being thief slash bard, I don't have any of the problems with like him letting her do the heavy lifting. I mean, if you've played D&D, when you assemble your team and you have different classes, you're going to have people doing different skill set things during your mission, your quest, your heist, whatever you're doing.
yeah, and from what I saw, and unless I missed something, and I was pretty engaged the entire time we watched the movie. I was paying close attention to everything. But unless I missed something, like, yes, there were moments where, a male character was the butt of a joke, but every character was the butt of a joke at some point or another.
Yeah, they also, I mean, Holga was the butt of a few jokes, a few times. There's a interesting running joke about her love interests that I
Yep.
think is pretty funny and works. So it's, I mean, it's a throwback, just straightforward fantasy action comedy, and the beats that they use. One element that we talked about when we were kind of just going off the trailer was the sorcerer triggering the bridge trap, and and I remember specifically you were like, "Oh, look, stupid man makes problem." But in the context of the movie, the way it's set up, and then that is the payoff, it actually is a very funny moment and works really well. I was laughing, and I think you were too.
Oh, I busted up at that part. Now in the trailer, it doesn't do it justice. It's a much longer setup in the movie, and the setup and the payoff of it are perfect. And while yes, it does make him out to have done something stupid. The nice thing about it is they give it right back to him like 5 minutes later. Like there's that balance where yes,
Mhm.
we had him do something dumb, but now we're also going to give him a chance to shine.
Yeah, in fact, he's the he caused the problem, but he also creates the solution.
Yep.
So, and one thing I'll point out, having watched the movie now, the most competent, party member is a male. So, no, the character is a little underrepresented in the trailers, and the part isn't on screen as much as the other people. But what was the character's name? Because I do believe he's got a very big lore role.
I don't remember his name, but I mean, he's your classic paladin. He really is.
Yeah, and they almost do a um,
He almost
Drax.
feels like a
a-
self-insert NPC that the DM is playing.
and I think they did that because he has like straight like immediate responses to push the people to take action,
Yes.
and
It's like his
it,
character flaw is he's too awesome.
and like Drax from Guardians of the Galaxy, he definitely has a very literal language system,
I find irony is a blade that cuts he who wields it the most.
which is good. And the actors that were cast have good charisma, good chemistry with one another. It works.
Yeah, I don't think it would have if they didn't have Chris Pine.
Chris Pine is a very like he brings so much charisma to the screen in the stuff he's in.
Well,
It,
he tied this whole thing together too. Like there are times when you look at his character and you're like he is the most worthless character in this party. But then there are other times when it's like this party would not survive without him.
I would say like if he was filling out the character sheet, the charisma would probably be all off the charts. That's where a lot of the stat rolls was going.
Oh yeah, it's a solid 18, maybe even a 20. He might be
Because
getting +5 on those checks.
yeah, is that I'm thinking that's probably common if someone's playing as a bard, they're gonna start tweaking those slots.
Oh, if you're a bard, you're dumping everything into charisma.
You got to
Like
woo people with your song.
charisma and dexterity are pretty much going to be your go-tos. Um, Intelligence also might be helpful because skill checks. But no, I thought it was okay. I was surprised he never got a weapon. I would say because I kind of broke it down in my head as to how I rated some of the key elements of this whole thing. And what I ended up coming around to was the jokes. I give them an 8, solid 8 for the jokes. Several of those jokes had me laughing out loud in the theater. The lore, I'm going to give a 9 because they did a really good job with the lore. Lost points for the Underdark thing because they just made it feel like the Underdark was like right below the surface. And that was a little weird.
Yeah,
Because the Underdark
apparently
is supposed to be like, you got to go real deep to get to the Underdark.
they got it on like they tied one like batch of rope around a tree trunk and then and were able to drop right in. So that
Yeah.
definitely
Well,
wouldn't be
and then like,
miles underneath.
that's not even that big a deal because it's like, okay, well, maybe they just didn't do a very good job portraying that they made a journey from there, right? But then the way they escaped, where they broke out the ground and then swam to the surface, which, which was apparently not that far away. It's like, no. Big nope on that one.
Yeah, it looked like they were basically at the bottom of a not too deep lake, or they were. I think they were supposed to be at the coast of the ocean, so the shallow, getting to the shallow shoreline level of the ocean.
Yeah. The story I gave a 7. It's not a super amazing story by any means, but it's solid. And then the lowest score I gave to it was costumes, specifically weapons and armor.
I did think they had a touch on the costumes. It would looked a little chintzy. I
Yeah, some of the costumes, like some of the outfits they wore weren't terrible. But the weapons were pretty garbage. Like the sleeve mount, the arm mounted sling that the one girl was using, I'm like, that's stupid. That's terrible. And the fact that the paladin fired his sword, and again, you see this in the previews, so this is not a spoiler, but the fact that you watch the paladin fire his sword as though, and the blade just comes flying off and he's holding a dagger, I'm like, no, no, no.
no.
So some of that was crappy. They had some really cool looking like the wondrous items and the some of the other stuff. It was cool, but yeah, some of the like they could have done a lot better with the weapons and the armor, I think. Especially since from a D&D perspective, like it's like Diablo, you know, getting the new armor, getting the new sword, getting the new weapon. That's a big part of it. That's why most people play. I want cooler gear, you know?
Yeah, you gotta. I mean, you're chasing the loot, right? And especially these guys were supposed to be thieves, so you'd think they would have been buying upgraded equipment. I guess his musical instrument. What is it called? It's a
Loot.
his lute. Oh, there you go. Double meaning. The loot was high quality because he was using it as a weapon at various points within the movie, and it was
Yeah.
holding up. It was holding up as much as like a club or any kind of blunt object weapon would, which that kind of surprised me. I didn't think that. I mean, it didn't look like, that you could have at least thrown a comment in that it was like magic so that it wouldn't break, because he was wailing on people with it. So, I mean, it didn't take me out of the movie too much. But you're right. I think the armor design, especially on the paladin, was a little chintzy.
Yep.
And it looked like a little Party City. There was a little too much Party City vibe to some of the costumes and weapons. Definitely not up there with with what they were doing with the Lord of the Rings stuff.
No.
But on the other hand, it's not as terrible as you might think the way we're talking about it, because in the context of a action comedy where it's all kind of done a little bit for laughs,
I'd
it
say
doesn't detract it too much.
The only time it took me out of it, like, was when Holga's axe fell in the forge, and then she pulled it back out, and it was covered in like I don't know what, and she's like, "Oh, I'm okay with that," and I'm like, "Your axe has no blade anymore." Like, come on.
Yeah, I think it was the molten like forge,
Yeah, it was
section. Like,
slag, basically.
yeah,
It was liquid slag.
and that was and what's interesting is there's a lot of buildup for that axe early on, where you're finding out about the material it's made of, what items are involved, and
Yeah, that was like, and that actually is a like that's pretty decent axe if I remember correctly. But like it's the one time when you see a character actually get like an upgrade, you know? Because beyond that, it's not like they're getting armor upgrades or they're finding new gear. Really, they go after one specific item that they eventually get, which is the sorcerer needs it, and then They find another item by chance, and they really just use the hell out of those couple of items. Like, they don't get better armor. They don't pick up new weapons.
No, there's definitely not really a
Yes,
traditional.
Brahma. Michelle Rodriguez does have resting bitch face and a tough guy attitude all movie.
Well, I mean, that's her job.
And it's exactly what she needed to do. They cast the right broad for the job.
She's supposed to. Yeah, she's a barbarian in Dungeons and Dragon land. So,
And she's also dumb. And she does a really good job at being dumb. Like, at one point, they're like, we need the druid to shapeshift into something that can get into the castle and figure out what they're doing in there. So, like, maybe turn into a mouse. And she's like, or a deer. The bard looks at her and is like, yeah, that way she can blend in with all the other deer in the castle.
In the castle, it was, and the look, because she's playing. Sometimes the actor is perfect casting for the role, because the looks she's giving back, like when people question her stupidity, she's just like, "What are you mean? Like, why wouldn't this work?" Well, it's a. I mean, what was it? Does go back. Yeti, you better not steal my jokes from my roast.
Oh, I did watch his roast, but I disagree with Yeti. I give the movie a lot more credit than he does, and I didn't see any good jokes in that roast anyway.
Oh no. We can't, this is live, so we can't edit Yeti's comments out like Mads does on the movies with Mad. So if we do steal any jokes, it'll be well documented.
I'll pull his video up on the side, and if there's any good ones, I'll steal them now.
That's true. That's how we get to be YouTubers. But so no, I think so. We both agree that it was a solid, good movie. If I had to rate it, I'd say this is probably worth a matinee price. I would not pay full price to take especially a family. Like, when you talk about taking a family to a movie, you're committing like $70-$80 to go. So, but matinee price, where the tickets are, at least out my way, matinee price are like around $7 a ticket. That can make a big difference.
See, for me, I mean,
So
I'd go see it again.
Yeah, he did like the movie. He just made the jokes for the fun. So
oh no, I know he liked the movie. I was just giving him shit, but for me, I'd go see the movie again, and I'd pay full price. I'm not going to. I'm gonna wait till it comes to my home theater, and then I'm just gonna buy it. But if you really like D&D and you very specifically you enjoy the Forgotten Realms campaign setting and you're familiar with a lot of that lore, you'll enjoy this movie.
As someone who hasn't played D&D a ton, and especially in a long time, I managed to enjoy the movie. Oh, we have some.
I just wanted to come on and say, fuck you, Slender. That was it. Okay, bye.
No, but Yeti, what do you think? Like, I know you already did a roast, and I heard some of your opinions, but like, what'd you like? What didn't you like?
I mean, some of the stuff in it was exaggerated. That's why at the start I said, like, take it with a grain of salt, because I mean, I'm just trying to make a light of it, but it's fun. It's not going to win Oscars, but it's not terrible. It's definitely worth streaming. I'd also, if you like this genre, it's definitely worth a price of a ticket. It's not like Top Gun Maverick where I'm like, oh my God, this is so amazing. It's fun. It's a popcorn flick. If you don't have anything else to watch, you're going to have fun. You got family, do a matinee, and if you really like it, the prime time, you'll probably have a good time.
And I'd
Yep.
say that if you are a fan of this genre, since we all I think agree this is a nice, just good time, and it's a
Mhm.
solid action fantasy kind of movie.
Yeah.
If you want this kind of movie to get made, you need to show up and buy tickets because fantasy just has the worst reputation in Hollywood. Like Hollywood hates making fantasy movies. You have to really drag them to think that, across the line to think that fantasy will make money because when
Well,
they
and more
make
so than
fantasy,
anything, fantasy is the one they do wrong. Like
well,
Yeah,
that's
no
the
kidding.
problem. They
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 just
keep
don't do it
doing
right ever.
like they keep doing stupid versions of it and then saying, well, nobody wants to go see fantasy, and then they make Lord of the Rings and it's one of the most successful
Yeah.
trilogies of all time.
The same goes for sci-fi too, I think. They always do it just terrible, but you've got some of the biggest franchises of all time in fantasy and sci-fi, but nobody ever does them like that.
Well, I understand why nobody really bothers making good sci-fi anymore. Because honestly, after Tartarus, what's like they've peaked.
that was pinnacle. You're never going to achieve
Oh
that.
my god, that movie was that movie will haunt me having watched it. I've seen bad movies. I was the one who, between me and Mads, had seen Southland Tales, and now
Why you gotta go bring that up, Chad?
because I'm pointing out that movie, that was a bad movie, and I was okay sitting through it, but man, Tartarus.
No, honestly,
so
it was less suffering watching Tartarus than Southland Tales.
now Brahma is like he watched. We
You had the
invited
invite, Brahma.
you were invited. You just had other things to do, and and weren't able to attend. And you might be better for having not seen that movie.
Hey,
So-
Brahma, to quote the Big Lebowski, life does not stop and start at your convenience, you piece of shit.
I thought you were going to quote me. It was watching Better Without You.
No, ever since we watched the Big Lebowski, I'm just always looking for places to quote it now.
Shut up, Donnie. Shut the fuck up, Donnie.
Shut the fuck up, Donnie. You're out of your element.
Donnie, you're out of your element. Shut the fuck up.
I don't know how many times I've made a joke about Jesus having to knock on the door and tell everybody what he did in the last few weeks. It just
Oh,
movie-
damn. I haven't made a Kevin Pollak joke in a while. Man, I snuck those in every like there's a long stretch with them.
You could have done it in Tartarus and be like, maybe the alien was Kevin Pollak. Yeah.
Oh, I regret
8-year-olds,
that now.
dude.
8-year-olds.
What is Brahma doing? Why isn't he in here? Well, I
He's
guess he's
watching
your
the
like
stream.
one viewer.
Yeah, we don't get the views on the live stream. We talked about that right at the beginning. The shorts, man. The shorts are where the views are coming in for us. Like,
Are you doing regular videos though?
no, we haven't really got into it. We've talked about it. It's
Because
Weird.
yeah, that's all part of it.
It's
Yeah.
complicated. We have like real jobs and families and shit.
Well, murder them and then you probably solve.
I am not going to Benoit my family. That's a WWE reference, so you don't have to kick us off YouTube for that.
Oh, I thought that little child kidnapped. The wasn't that like
No, that was
Michelle or something?
Chris Benoit, the wrestler. You know, who ended up.
Yeah, but wasn't there a little kid with that name? The famous case.
Oh, Jean-Benet Ramsey.
Oh yeah, that's it. That was close.
Well, it's got the, I guess, Benet.
It's got a B and an
Benoit, Benet. Yeah.
E. Yeah, it's cool. It's close.
That's right. It was Roid Rage, and which is why whole episodes of the WWE's archives which are supposed to be like 3-hour shows, are suddenly only like 2 hours and 10 minutes because they cut out every scene, every clip that has Chris Benoit in it. What's awesome is not awesome, but if you create a wrestler on the WWE video games and name it any combination of like Chris Benoit or try to give those moves, they will delete the wrestler from your files. They won't let you have it. They take that stuff very seriously.
I don't know anything about this.
No. Well, we can we can get back to Dungeons and Dragon. So so getting back, like when you do get a fantasy movie that's actually decent, go out and buy a ticket. Like that's what matters. We complain a lot about things that are terrible, and rightly so. We shouldn't have to put up with bad stuff. We shouldn't have to put up with them just with Hollywood screwing with IPs that are beloved. But on the other hand, you've got to actually go out there and try to support the things when they do it right. You can't just blanket be a naysayer and expect things to change. You got to actually show them the direction to go.
Except with Disney, you can pretty much bet on Disney fucking it up at this point.
I don't think their marketing is doing them any favors.
No, we talked about that. The trailers were made so terrible for this. They could have cut way better, like
in the posters.
Yeah, it's actually we didn't. I think Slender and I both were talking. We don't understand what the idea of how they marketed it, how they got there, because it seemed like they were doing it to make this movie fail instead of succeed. It was like they're making choices to actively turn off the fan base. Like you want to make guys who like Dungeons and Dragons excited to see this movie, and you could, but they didn't.
Yeah, I didn't think the trailers were like the worst. Definitely not the best, though. It was, well, they were definitely trying to hide some, because so many times when you put out a trailer, they just show you the absolute best parts and then the movie's ruined. Like, how it's going to start and end. I don't think they didn't do that, but they didn't include like the better moments. And we need more fat dragons. I am so on board the fat dragon train.
Yeah, there's only one fat dragon though. Like he's from the lore. He is a real dragon from Forgotten Realms lore.
Oh, you nerd. The fact that you know that depresses me.
I know. You would be amazed at how much of the lore was in this movie that I know. Like I've read a lot of the books.
When are we going to play? Because we're supposed to play.
Still waiting on Matt to tell us when we're going to have.
Well, screw Matt then. Well, we're just going to start without him.
Well, we could have Matt tell us to show up to do a movie and then end up watching Big Lebowski because he doesn't come in. Because that can happen too. No, he'll get it worked out, I'm sure. I know.
We'll just start the conversation without him, then he'll join in and then he'll be on board again.
Yeah, I mean, if we talk about it right now, every once in a while he drops in on the show. So maybe he'll hear us talking about it. We'll do our session 0 right now. Brahma, get in here.
Sure.
We'll do
session
it
0.
We'll do it live like Bill O'Reilly. We're gonna do
Fuck
it live.
We'll do it live. Now, I was curious if you guys wanted to do like Avatar The Last Airbender or something instead, because I know Slender didn't want to give anything for to Wizards of the Coast because they've kind of been douchey lately, well, for the last decade.
Yeah, and despite how good the movie is, I don't think it's going to win them back any goodwill with their core base.
Oh, probably not. I don't know if this was a core base movie anyways.
If you're a D&D fan, like a longtime D&D fan, there's plenty for you to like in this.
I mean, there's stuff for you to like, but I don't know if it was
You think it's designed to bring in newer players?
Yes.
I'm sure it is.
Yeah.
I mean, but the problem is at this point, they got to come up with some way to win back older players because I think they've lost most of them.
Oh, yeah, definitely. Which is why I said, like, well, we could do a whole game around Avatar The Last Airbender, which would be cool to become like an earthbender, firebender, or maybe like in the Witcher world or something. But D&D, like I'm also on board for that.
I mean, I'd have to do some research. If we're going much beyond, like, I'm very familiar with the Forgotten Realms campaign setting, and I have my own world setting, and then I've dabbled in Pathfinder, so I can run a campaign in Pathfinder, but I'd have to. There'd be a lot more heavy lifting on the research end because I'm not that familiar with Pathfinder.
Just wing it. Just do it live.
I mean, half of DMing is doing it live, but you still got to have like a basic framework built out.
Sounds like
That's
Twitter
only
talk.
that's only to be a well prepared DM who can handle your stream. Like
I am not used to that.
we don't need that. We need to be like, I want to hear a lot of give me a second when we asked it about things in the campaign.
I always thought it had more to do with like just the dice rolls and stuff, making sure that you're doing that properly. I would think that's the bigger concern.
Well, the DM orchestrates and plans out the entire campaign if they're doing it right.
Yeah, but at this point, I'm assuming Slender's going to do it wrong.
A plan B, a plan C, and then if I need to, I'll come up with a plan D on the fly.
And then if you need to, you go back to plan A.
We'll call it
from the movie.
We'll call it plan. But we'll call it plan E because plan A has a stink about it now. It was actually a pretty well done line, and Chris Pine's charisma, his charisma stat off the charts. It works, and that's what you need to do. Like,
yeah, Brahma, we're setting up the game right now.
Yeah, I kind of derailed their whole stream discussion.
That's how we do our show. That's how we like it. We just ramble through things and have
you
good
just
time.
like it rammed in.
Ramble, but yeah. No, that was in Tartarus
style.
That's yeah. Oh no.
Tartarus.
Oh god.
Tartarus was that. If you go right after our show, head over to Mad Barber Entertainment and enjoy that latest episode of Movies with Mad, so you can understand all our in jokes that we're making right now.
Yeah. Go over there and laugh at our pain because we watched that whole movie.
Still better than Southland Tales. Fuck that movie.
I hard disagree on it being better than Southland Tales.
I would watch Tartarus 100 times before I watch Southland Tales again.
I don't know. It's a toss-up. Like, I don't.
Did you know that in the future, scientists believe it will be 80% more futury than we thought?
That's true. That's true. But at least they had actors in Southland Tales.
And Yeti, remember, Southland Tales had an LP SWAT officer. And
I don't care. I do not care at all. It was. Let's go back to talking about setting up the stuff. I don't want to remember Southland Tales.
Okay. So we've got to talk about. I guess we'd be doing a digital tabletop system.
Oh yeah, Roll20 is very good for that.
Yeah, that's what I've set up accounts for.
And I'm already set up, so that really helps me.
So I guess I should look at that one. Is that going to be as good as the online poker place we were playing?
Oh no, it'd be way better than that.
Yeah.
Cool.
Which is kind of sad because that, like, I would have thought it'd be way easier to set up an online poker game with your friends. Like, I did not think that was going to be a difficult task, but
I mean, now that real gambling is legal all over the internet, I think that's where all the money for development went.
Well, you wouldn't want to gamble with your friends?
I mean, low dollar figures, I suppose.
The second real money's involved, I'm out.
Yeah. Like
you've seen my luck. It's non-existent, which is why
had nothing
I don't
to do
gamble.
with luck. That was just you being a bad poker player.
No, it wasn't.
The chips say otherwise.
I don't know that they do.
Yeah, because I won them all and I was better.
No, you were stupid lucky.
No, I was better. Anyways, we'll end on me being better. And oh, okay. So to say something more about this movie, if people are wondering, a lot of the jokes are really good, but sometimes they did drag on. It's like they needed to end 30 seconds earlier, you know? But when they're hitting, they were really hitting well.
Yeah, I think the graveyard is an example of running a joke too long.
Yes, that's exactly what I'm thinking of right now.
Yeah, the graveyard scene, but most of that joke was still pretty funny.
It was. Well, that's what I'm saying. Like it was landing and hilarious. And then they're like, oh, okay, this scene needs to be cut down a bit. Keep it short and sweet.
But some of those jokes, like that's half the setup. Like when he's talking about how they have to cross the bridge. I loved that part.
That was really funny. I did like that.
The bridge part we mentioned was sold terribly in the trailer and worked amazing in the movie.
Yes.
Yeah, I don't think I would have included that part in the trailer because it doesn't work the same way.
No, and it almost kills the joke when you do see it.
Yeah. You really need that as something that isn't included, so you know nothing about it. Then you go in and the paladin, the guy who obeys every single rule, is telling you this ridiculous scenario. Okay, we're gonna take left, right, up, and then when we get to the center, you flip, and the guy just walks first. Oh, I didn't know that's where the bridge began and the thing collapsed. Like, that was awesome. That was so good. It was well timed.
Yeah. It not the funniest part to me though. I think the joke that got me more than any other joke was when they were using the illusion spell and the sorcerer got his foot stuck and was distracted and failed his concentration check.
The bard dancing and starts like melting.
Yeah.
Yes, yeah. That was good.
That was good. And that was another the sorcerer being kind of a bumbling, goofy guy in the trailers seemed off, but in the movie worked much better.
Yep. And in all honesty, they like it's kind of, and this might just be because I've been playing D&D for almost 30 years now. But when you're watching this movie, you can see where they failed a check. You can see where somebody rolled a 1. You can see where somebody rolled a natural 20. Like, it feels like an actual campaign that some players sat at a table with a DM and played through. And then they just took notes and made a movie out of it.
Yeah, I could see that.
Yeah, I thought it's a good fun time. It feels entertaining. I think that it would be safe to take my 8-year-old son to. It's got, there's a couple instances where maybe the violence might be a little far for a younger child.
No, they're going to love that. Like, yeah, swords.
Well, there's a couple shots of heads being removed, but it's usually
there's a couple good jump scares too.
Yeah, but they're usually pulled back. So I think a younger child, but who's a little more able to handle that kind of stuff. If they've seen any of the Star Wars movies, specifically Attack of the Clones, where Jango Fett gets eliminated that way, they're going to be fine seeing this one. So you can take your kids to see this and not worry. There's nothing in this movie that's going to be bad for your kids to learn or see or enjoy, which is another plus in its, on its side. I don't see any messaging that would be, that's blatant or bad or would keep me from wanting to bring my family to see the movie, which is true for a lot of other stuff. So that's another big check mark for this one, in my opinion.
Yeah, I don't understand that whole we love to emasculate our male characters. I didn't get that vibe. I got more, oh, that's a barbarian. Barbarians are the ones up front, and they got more final blows type of thing than the bard. But it wasn't so offensively over the top or bad where he's offering nothing. He's just he's doing
more of a strategy
doing
guy.
his part. Pardon?
He's more of a strategy guy.
Yeah. Which would make sense when you're playing the game. So I was like, I don't know where they got that whole messaging from, unless it's the fact that like, oh yeah, we got the female barbarian.
No, I mean, I think they were just talking out their asses, because while there are a couple times that the men are emasculated, there are just as many times that the women are the butt of the joke.
They're not really emasculated. That's the thing.
No, not really. And
No.
and every character in that party was the butt of one joke or another at some point.
Yes.
Except maybe the tiefling druid. I think she was their favorite because, well, she never seemed to do anything wrong.
Well, remember,
did it seem like she's a little forgettable though?
Yeah, she was kind of a boring character.
Like, I think I forgot to include her in under characters, like, because she's there, but I don't really know what she did aside from transform a couple times.
Yeah,
like
the owlbear is the most memorable thing about her character.
CG self is more memorable than her.
Yes.
And like the entire sequence where there's a lot of animal changing happening in short succession was very memorable, but it wasn't because of her acting. It was because of the way the scene was constructed and the shifting to different animals.
I didn't think her acting was bad. It's just she wasn't memorable, Like
her acting was passable, but her character was just kind of boring.
The character was there. It wasn't really a part of the group, but she was, but it's just, you totally kind of forget about her. Like the paladin was way more memorable, and it was there for not even half the movie. It's like a third of the movie, maybe.
Yeah. Yeah, it seemed like, obviously, Chris Pine's character was the kind of the core of the whole arc. The barbarian, she is his partner, and so you get quite a bit of her backstory, so to speak. So she's part of that main arc. And then the sorcerer, he had a good arc, and you get a lot of his stuff, but you don't get much in the way of her arc, her motivations, her backstory. Okay, she's a tiefling that went and lived with the elves as a druid because humans didn't like her, and that's why she didn't like humans very much.
Honestly,
and that's her whole fucking story.
I don't remember how she became part of it.
So Brahma says, so like Shredda, or more like Yeti, not part of the group. That's mean. Mean from the guy who doesn't show up when we invite him to watch the movie.
Yeah, at least Yeti's there.
You'd have to start yelling, "Where's my Brahma at?" And then we won't ever get an answer because he's not.
Where's my Brahma at? Oh, he's not here.
He's not here. He's doing other things.
You're just gonna wait for disappointed echoes as the question comes back to you.
Side note: leave it to the Ascendant Art podcast to badger the one person who's watching their show.
That's right. We do
not give a fuck.
We don't because we'll get our views on the shorts. And that's
now the one bad thing I'd say is I don't know if the plot was cohesive enough. It seemed to
It
jump.
definitely almost seemed like it was a D&D campaign where it had fixed events that had to happen.
Yeah,
Like
it's like, okay, so we're gonna go here. Yeah, we're doing this thing. Oh, and then we're back here because we got to do this. Oh, that's a trap. So this happens. But it was, yeah, it was meandering. It wasn't the plot didn't do the movie as much justice.
I
Which
think
again goes
they
to the fun aspect of, so it doesn't get beyond being fun.
I
You know?
think they ran into an issue. Well, two issues technically. One, I mean, this movie was pushing 2 hours, if I remember correctly. So there was not a whole lot of time for random encounters or anything like that, and they didn't do a good job of indicating when they were traveling to different locations.
Well,
Like you didn't get
even
that feeling like time had elapsed. So this
and
all felt like it happened in a really short period of time,
yeah,
but like they were traveling to different locations. And like when they escape the prison at the beginning, you get that sense of their travels because you see they give you the kind of little montage travel scenes.
montage.
Yeah,
yep, as
but then
they're
once they're
picking up
once they're
horses and
finally at
equipment. Yeah.
Neverwinter and they're moving around to find the things that they need, you don't get any kind of travel montage, and it's kind of just like we're in Neverwinter. Okay, well now they're in some little village somewhere, and I don't know how far away this village was or how long it took them to fucking get there because they're just there.
And another thing was a poor definement of the main villain. It's like there wasn't really a main villain. You got, and I kind of think maybe they're trying to set up as like sequel bait. Oh, we're doing all this for the bigger, badder, powerful wizard, but you never gave this movie a really good villain. You
I
had
think,
one
yeah,
wizard
that
and
it counts on
guy that back stabs you.
it counts on people like Slender who know the deep lore, because he, coming out of the theater, he was talking to me about the wizard leader who was
Saztam.
Yeah, but he's
that
not
dude.
really a part of it. You get his flashbacks. He doesn't do anything because like he's
Well,
not.
you see him in one scene having a conversation with the female red wizard. Um, he's kind of in the shadows talking to her. But here's the thing:
I thought he was dead. Like
he
I
is.
thought that was okay. Yeah,
He's
so it's a
been
whole.
dead for hundreds of years. He's a
Okay,
lich.
you know what I mean. I thought that was like all the flashback stuff of just memory and whatever.
No,
Like
Zaztam he's a lich, so
yeah,
he's a wizard that turned himself into an undead.
I understand.
Um, he can't die per se.
Yes, no, I understand that. Death is not what. When I'm saying death, I don't mean like death in the D&D world. I mean death like in our world where
You
he's
thought
no
he was
longer
already
there.
defeated. No, he hasn't been defeated.
Yeah, so he really didn't play a very big part or big enough part.
No, but since they teased him so well, if there is a sequel, he'll be a damn good villain. He's like think of it in terms of Marvel before they fucked everything up, right?
no, but you still had to have
Shazam
him
is
more
the
present.
Thanos of this arc.
I understand that, but he still had to be in there more than just
No, the fuck he did. Was Thanos in the first Avengers movie?
no, but they took like 12 movies to build Thanos up. You're not going to get 12 Dungeons and Dragons.
Yes,
movies.
by
That's not
slowly
going to happen.
hinting at his existence.
You're never going to get that. Like you're going to be lucky to get a sequel.
I agree. You probably will be lucky to get a sequel, but
which
I
means
don't
you have
feel
to have
like
him
he
more.
needed to be the main villain. If this
No.
movie fails, then fuck it.
I didn't see the main. He had to play a bigger part.
No, he
and
didn't.
he 100% did in order to set him up for the next villain.
No,
You can.
this is not how D&D works.
This is how movies and plot works.
The big villain in this story was one of his direct subordinates, aka his henchman.
Yes,
They got
is
through his
literally
henchman,
fine.
so he'd be the next villain.
Yes, that would work, but you have to show that there's a bigger bad that's working behind the scenes better so that it gives it more weight and people get excited about seeing
They
this
showed
group go
him
up against them
destroy an
next.
entire country, turn everyone in that country into undead soldiers, and then several times thereafter give instructions to his subordinate, who was the big bad of this movie. What the fuck
Yeah,
are you
that
talking
happens
about,
in
Yeti?
like 30 seconds, and it's never mentioned, shown. Like, he does not play any role. It's like, yeah, there's this one big bad, and that's it. There had to be way more development of him in the background.
No, there really didn't need to be more development.
100% there did.
I disagree wholeheartedly.
I could not disagree with you more wholeheartedly. Like,
okay, well, I don't know
Palpatine
what you
doesn't
said,
work.
but I won that because what you said sucked.
Like, Palpatine wouldn't work if you never showed what he like.
Palpatine wasn't even in the first Star Wars movie.
Yeah, it was a trilogy. He was in the second, which set up the third.
Yes, so if
There's not going to
Sazcam
be
was in
three
the
of these,
first, which
though.
sets up the second, what's your fucking argument?
There's not going to be three of these, so you can't pull the same thing.
You're not pulling the same thing. He's in the first, which sets up the second. Just like Palpatine
He is
was
not
in the
in
second,
there.
which sets up the third.
The stakes for him aren't well defined well enough for a story that's going to pull people in for a sequel.
They literally said that the whole point of this movie was Tam was trying to take Neverwinter.
Saying that and having his
and then seeing it all play out and having the main characters thwart those plans.
No, but you never experience how powerful he is in any way. They're like, oh yeah, he made an undead army, and then there's like
you literally get a whole sequence where they show it happen.
It's an extremely brief sequence. Like, it's got no real impact on what happened in the story. Because the bigger thing was the subordinate, and then
it literally defines the entire purpose of what was going on in the story we watched.
Not well enough. Not strong enough.
You get two flashbacks because you get the part where the paladin gives the actual backstory to the coup. And then you get the personal flashback where you see the child running away from his family getting turned. So I think they did show both on the kind of the global sense of him taking over the country, making him a big bad, and then on the personal sense of showing like children being attacked by their own parents, a very personal level of how it was terrible. Now, Yeti's right that you've got to plan.
Right, I am.
Well, I'm not going to say about every. I'm going to say that when you've got one, when you're doing one standalone movie and you're not guaranteed any sequels, you should make it compartmentalized and not try to go there. Now, what Slender's saying is that they just kind of they showed him being the director of the underling who was working, working as the villain of this movie. Would it have worked better with just the villain working through their own designs? I don't know.
No, I would still want that the subordinate, because you can't have this group going up against the major bad, because that would go against a sequel story. So you just have to have it develop better and show his effect on the world and that threat, having that developed much further so that there's a looming threat that is going to bring an audience in for the next one. That's going to make them like cry about like, we need to see how this ends so that it doesn't get cut. It's like it's why
oh no, you're the storyteller I hate. You're the storyteller I hate. Everything has to end on a fucking cliffhanger.
No, not a cliffhanger. I'm
Yes, that's what you said.
No.
Oh, I have to see how this plays out, so I have to see the next movie.
No. It's alluding to a bigger world, but you have to have that a self-contained story that is capable of expanding. So John, like, okay, the first
You mean
John
like
Wick
this movie
movie.
we're talking about?
No, this movie didn't do a good enough job to show that there was a much bigger world out there. That there is way more adventure.
All right, I think you're insane, but okay.
Uh, at least we can all agree it's a generally good movie, which
Yeah, it's
is
a lot of fun.
a lot of this kind of thing is like the nitpicking thing that nerds will be able to do on any movie forever. Like, so I'm not,
Basically,
yeah. So
Well,
the takeaway
that's
is,
part of the problem with the Forgotten Realms lore anyway. Like, you can't fit it all into a movie. It's fucking impossible.
yeah, that's why.
There are
Yeah, you
probably
can't do
200
that. You
plus
can't.
books set in the Forgotten Realms. Some of them around the Moon Sea, some of them around the Sea of Fallen Stars. A lot of them are along the Sword Coast. Some of them are up in 10 towns north of the spine of the world. You don't even, that's not even counting the wastes on the other end of the map, where you've got the Fall of High Watch, the Chosen of Nandawan. Like, it is.
We get it. We get it. You weren't laid until college. We understand.
Okay, well, you're wrong and you're stupid again. But my point is,
It was a
you
good
can't
joke. Screw you.
encapsulate the entirety of Earth in a movie, and the Forgotten Realms
Yes,
lore is basically that big.
Yeah, there's no way to encapsulate that. It would be foolish to, because we've seen movies where they've tried to do that and it fails miserably. You're just throwing way too much in, and it's overwhelming. It's disjointed. Like, this did a better job than those other ones in the past.
yeah, I think it was a. I mean, you compare this to Dungeons and Dragons from what, 2000? It's
Oh.
you
I
know,
don't even know what if that was set in a campaign setting or if they just made their own world. Fucking bunch of gold dragons flying around fighting red dragons, all CG'd and looking like shit. I hated that movie.
Do you know
now
any of the
Jeremy
history
Irons
behind
was
it?
still like really committed
Behind
which was,
that old D&D movie?
Yeah, yeah.
No, if I did, I've wiped it from my memory.
No, like, so originally James Cameron was going to direct it, and so the person that bought the rights was this, like, just this really young guy, and he saw D&D. He's like, oh, this is really cool. You know, I could probably just buy the rights to a movie for really cheap. So he did. So you got this really young guy that just bought it, then tried to sell it to big studios. And then when he had some of the bigger directors like fall out, he was ultimately forced by the studios to direct it himself and put it all together himself. So he had no idea what he was doing, and so he makes this clusterfuck of a movie that was never supposed to happen in that way. Like, it was originally going to have this, big Hollywood director that would have done something amazing with the property, and just because of backstabbing and all that, he was forced to do it himself.
Well, there is that.
But he was pretty genius for buying it up on like pennies on the dollar.
and now Hasbro owns it and was trying to make a multimedia empire for themselves. So, and it's all gone terribly. Did you know they've already put up the studio that they call E1, the Hasbro like entertainment division, is up for sale before this movie even opened. They're like, nah, we're gonna be done with this. We just want to start pumping money through overprinting Magic cards.
Oh yeah, they're killing Magic.
Isn't Wizards of the Coast killing it?
Well, Hasbro owns Wizards of the Coast.
Yeah.
I guess that means Hasbro needs to step in and like, hey, smarten the fuck up,
Well, Hasbro, what they did is they brought in the person they put in charge of Wizards of the Coast was from Xbox, like the Xbox division at Microsoft, who was in charge of monetization and microtransactions.
Okay.
So shockingly, their philosophy was we're under monetizing our our player base. So we should add in more monetization things, and that's when they started overprinting the magic cards, and they also decided to redo the player agreement, and that got like that went over like a lead balloon.
That seems like the least of their issues with that company. Like that is the lowest thing on the total pole that I would have been worried about with those properties. It is way more to do with the culture that they've catered to and just destroying and pushing away old fans.
Well, yeah, Slender's talked about it, where they were killing their golden goose because they're pushing away the fans who were buying by the dozen the like rule manuals and campaign books, and they're just, I don't know like what their thought is. If you when you have a loyal fan base who has a certain level of expectation, you keep them happy first and then work on trying to bridge in and get new additional people. But your committed fans are the ones who are guaranteed income every year. Star Wars used to have that with Star Wars toys. Like
And
when
that's the problem they ran into, really. Like, I get it. You want to bring in new customers. You want to keep the community growing and everything else. So there are these projects designed to attract a younger audience, bring in new people. But like, much as everybody likes like Critical Role and people who go see this movie might like this movie, like those aren't your customer base. And even the ones who do come, they might come in and dabble for 6 months to a year and then be done with it. The people you're driving away are the ones that have been playing D&D for 10 years plus.
And like the way
And
they've been driving them away
if you
too.
publish something, they're going to throw money at you for it. Like, those are the people you want to keep happy.
Well, what is really bad is the way that they've been pushing those people away. Because like this is a world where you can do and say anything, and they tried to limit what you can do and say in your games. Like, how asinine is that? You've got an entire world that's based on imagination, and then you take away imagination. You're not going to succeed.
The things that they're so focused on too, like
Pronouns and wheelchair accessible dungeons.
Well, like the orcs are people too crap, where they're like, I don't know who thought orcs were black people. I always thought orcs were green people, but whatever. But
it is
like,
so if you think an orc is a black person, you're just straight up racist. The fact that that is the first thing that pops into their mind.
Oh yeah, it's straight racist. But the funny thing is, like, if you're familiar with the lore, and R.A. Salvatore has written like several books. One in particular called The Orc King. And the orc are a tribal people. I would liken them more to the Native Americans than anything. Now,
well, that's it. Cancel Slender.
Their culture, as far as their culture is, and when we're saying that, let's be honest. I'm not talking about the friendly, peaceful native tribes. I'm talking about the
extra cancellation.
But
can you be double secret extra canceled?
We're triple canceled at this point. But no, like, and then they're talking about getting rid of offensive topics, and I'm like, in one of the Aravis Kale books, they go into a slaver's port in the Underdark that is governed by 4 flying skulls. And literally all they do there, the entire economy is based on selling slaves of every size, gender, race, whatever, and then distributing them out to the rest of the Forgotten Realms.
And the fact that the idea is, we're going to take out any offensiveness. How are you going to stop the people
how are you going to have adventures without bad people?
Exactly. And so it's creating this foot over people, and that is pushing everyone away because you don't want, like, oh my god, it's so asinine. It's so asinine, and there is no reason for it. Like, you could just tell people to play the game the way they want to play it. That's it. If you want to add wheelchair accessible ramps to your dungeon, you were fully capable of doing that beforehand. You didn't need any of this extra stuff. You could have said, yep, so my character's got a wheelchair in medieval times for some reason. I don't know why. And this dungeon is accessible. Done. Your DM was capable of pulling that off.
Yeah, if you and your fellow bronies want to go on an adventure where you save the world with the power of friendship, go right the fuck ahead.
Yeah,
that's not my campaign.
Exactly. You were
because it's brilliant. You're like, oh my gosh, we've got like a Lich King that we have to take on because he could take over the entire planet. So let's go into this dungeon with someone who's handy capable. That's
right.
That's exactly how you would do it.
Also,
I'm sure Wheelchair Phil's gonna do great in that final battle.
It's like American Dad, and it's Wheels and the Leg Man. Like over here, like it doesn't work.
Who is actually disabled and then desperate to play as someone disabled in their fantasy campaign? I don't know about you.
No shit. If I was bound to a wheelchair, I'd want to play someone with legs.
Like you want to get out of your body and you want to play something fantastic in the world.
Rob wants to chime in to make sure we don't give Matt ideas about the bronies thing.
Oh, so. Okay. Well, we have to force Matt to play a brony in a wheelchair.
Oh my gosh! Can we make sure Slender? How would you do the agility roll for someone in a wheelchair?
Natural 1 every single time.
I mean, it depends. If it's a straight dexterity check, there'd probably be like a -4 penalty. But if we're talking like an acrobatics check, that's just like a -10 right off the top.
What is like Professor X with a hovering wheelchair? Maybe like, there was a good running joke in the Dungeons & Dragons movie that comes up and comes to mind right now, which is magic can't just fix everything. It doesn't work that way.
It can't fix your broken legs, man.
Just make Matt a brony and he pulls our cart.
if only there was a way we could talk to your dead ancestors. Well, we could try to use magic for that. No, you can't use magic for everything. He just said that. Actually, I can do that.
I think Brahma's onto something though. We'll make Mad the brony and he pulls our cart. We are all spinal.
We're writing the campaign as we speak.
What character class would that even be? Like, is there a character
brony,
class?
A centaur.
Oh, well, there you go. Let's make Matt.
Oh my god, it's a disabled centaur.
There we go. It's
got little wheels on the back.
Gimp leg because he twisted his ankle at the races.
Don't you have to put those down?
You know those dog wheels that they put them on the back of dogs. You give him that, so he's got like 2 front hoofs and then wheels at the back.
Since he wasn't here for it, Mad's centaur character is going to have the special ability wheels that you give the dogs whose back legs don't work.
Yeah, and like because it's in medieval times, there's a little bit of rust, so it squeaks when he moves. It's like,
Can we attach a rickshaw to him so he has to pull our characters? That like Brahma said.
I mean, he's not going to have a choice.
Oh, that would be fun. I don't even.
You guys are awful, by the way.
I don't know that would be allowed in what's the newest version of D&D where it got all woke. What's
5th edition?
5th edition.
But how do they stop you? You just say this is in it, and then the DM makes a couple adjustments to like the way they tell the story, and then it's still in there. Right? You can't stop anyone. But the fact that they're trying to make rules to stop people from thinking up ideas drives people away to other games like Pathfinder, because you want to stop the creativity.
Make him a centaur rogue with squeaky wheels, no stealth rogue. Oh, there's that. I think that should be how we set up the campaign. Is that we all play, but we have to pick stats for Mad.
Oh,
Man,
we have to pick stats for Mad.
Yeah,
Matt is not going to like this at all.
I was gonna say, be careful because you're giving me an idea right now.
That we all pick each other's stats.
Yes, everybody rolls up and builds out a character that somebody else has to play.
Oh, that actually is a hilarious idea.
And you don't know who's going to end up playing it. It'll be randomly assigned once I get all the character sheets.
Oh my god, this is going to backfire so badly because you know you're going to try to make the worst possible like character ever, right? And somebody else is.
Shredder
Yes,
gonna
and
be a
you know,
samurai that
Yeti,
only
that
eats
once
turtle
I've
meat.
got all the characters, I'm going to figure out which one's the worst of the worst and make you play that one.
Why would you give that to me? I've been nothing but good to you.
I think we'd have to randomly assign the crazy character. Like you pull a number out of a hat and you or whatever.
No, it'd be random. And
Yeah.
I mean, it might make for an interesting campaign.
Yeah, that is
I've never
'cause-
tried that before. Have everybody build a character that they know they're not going to play because it's going to be assigned to somebody else.
Oh man.
Brahma's gonna be a mute minotaur wizard.
No. Not a mute Minotaur wizard, a mute Minotaur bard.
He can't speak any spells.
So it's going to be an entire campaign with just bards. Every single person makes a bard.
That would be terrible.
Oh
Like a campaign. Like there's no. How did you balance your party? We didn't. It was all bards. we
We just
wanted to-
shove someone up front to be the tank and they die.
Basically, we're gonna be like a Japanese anime idol show.
Well, that's where the Minotaur would come in. He'd be your barbarian.
Oh no. Cancel Slender
Oh.
for that. Out
That
of
was-
everything he said tonight, that is the worst.
Oh, that's definitely an old DM joke right there.
Oh, the only way this would backfire though is you might not want to actually keep playing because you're stuck with the shit character that you don't want to play. So you lose interest.
Here's
How
the thing.
hilarious would it be if Brahma makes the joke about Yeti being a Yeti with dysentery because of the two asshole curse? If Brahma ended up having to play that character because that's the one that got assigned to him.
But here's the thing, right? I've played campaigns where our characters were pretty much randomly generated based on dice rolls. So you might get a character that was nothing like what you were envisioning in your head. Sometimes those characters that are something you never would have made yourself are the most fun. Like I have had a blast with some of those characters. So
Yeah.
it might not be bad. And if someone's really not feeling it, we can always, like,
Oh,
we can
they
always
died
talk
and someone else
offline.
appeared out of magic.
Yeah, like there's easy enough ways to get rid of one character and bring in a new one.
Oh my god, we were sleeping at a fire and someone got dragged away, but we got this homeless man that replaced him. And I guess we need 6 people, so he's joining.
Assign it to Shredder and she can make the sound effects for the Yeti character. I think Shredder's gonna have to make all sound effects. She can be the Foley artist for our
It's still gonna
online-
come out as pew pew pew.
I
pew.
fire an arrow and it goes pew, pew.
Those are also sword hits. The sword slashes pew pew.
No tang or ting or metal to metal sound. It's pew pew. It's like if this is medieval, it's not a laser gun. Pew pew. Or God forbid it sounds like a turkey call. That was Mary though.
Oh my! I don't even know what to do with that.
It's like because I've been to Virginia Tech, the Hokies, and that's what the turkey call is like their thing, and that's what it sounded like 100%.
Oh, Brahma! Yeah, Brahma's
Yeah,
right.
Beer Fest, it was like-
yeah, they did
It's
that.
like my brother told me all about you. I feel like I know you. In fact, if it makes it easier for you, just call me my brother's name.
Oh, landfill, you're better than the other landfill. Making love to the wife.
Yeah, that Beer Fest is a great. All the Broken Lizard movies are great. I personally actually like Club Dread is second to Super Troopers for me because that one just gets funnier every time I watch it. Don't no one expects the fun police, all that good stuff. If you haven't seen Club Dread and you like Super Troopers,
They're gonna have a new
you
one
should.
out soon too.
Yeah,
It's
Quasi. It
Quasi, that's it. Yeah,
comes out 420, of course.
of course.
420, which is on Hulu. I think it's streaming on Hulu.
Oh,
Yep.
okay.
Brahma knows coming out next month. Do we have time? Do you want to go to Picard? Do you want to do Nielson ratings? What do you want to do, Slender?
Slender.
Maybe we save Picard for next week and go straight to the Nielsen ratings.
Yeah, that's a good. Let's see. Switch to the Nielsen ratings because this is our first week with Mandalorian. Ooh.
Ugh.
And it
Ugh.
did not do well. It was fifth. It finished behind Last of Us. And look, hey Slender, what's our favorite one that came in ahead of Mandalorian? That's there every week we look.
NCIS. NCIS is climbing right now.
Yeah.
And that doesn't mean that more people are watching it. It just means less people are watching everything else.
Yeah, so I don't know yet. We point out, Yeti, that every week, like when everyone's like when all these streaming services are spending these gargantuan amounts of money on content, and NCIS is always in the top 10.
Yeah, for the last like 20 years.
Exactly. So the God knows what HBO spent on Last of Us. I have no idea what the budget for the Mandalorian is, but they'd be better off. Like Coco Melon is just cheap animation to put in, with kids, nursery rhymes, and it's doing almost as much as Mandalorian.
I don't recognize like any of these. And okay, I think I recognize We Have a Ghost, and that was one of the worst movies I've seen in a long time. That was such hot garbage. It was so
I think that was the with the guy from Stranger Things, the cop. That
was a hot mess that just needed to die.
Oh, for the first time, South Park popped in there because you know what week this was? This was the Meghan Markle Prince Harry week.
Nice.
So that jumped in because it made enough waves that people watched that one.
Well, when they said they were going after South Park for that, it's like you have just created the Streisand effect. Congratulations for making them more money.
But still, how do you go after them? Like, in what world are you going to win a lawsuit?
I'll sue you in England
over the joke
that was
a cartoon.
So when they did the Scientology episodes, like 15, was it like 16 years ago? And they were making fun of Tom Cruise. Tom Cruise did basically threaten to to sue them in England because Tom Cruise would sue people because the libel laws in England are actually very favorable to the person suing. So what the South Park people did is, to make sure that they were basically lawsuit proof, instead of airing it on television where commercials where they made any money on it, they only aired that episode for free at showings across the country. They basically would open a theater and let people come in for free to watch it. So there was no money. It was all just, and so there was no way to sue them because they didn't make it in England, I guess you have to make money off of it to be, then eligible to be sued. So they were like, F you, Tom Cruise. We're just going to show it anyone who wants to for free.
So my YouTube channel is safe.
I think we're all safe on the Ascended Art podcast is definitely safe. We are not even close to monetization, but it's hilarious. And so they can sue YouTube.
Did Slender pass out or something? Because I just made a self-deprecating joke and is like, just silence.
I'm sorry, I'm doing work on the side.
he's busy cooking up the meth out there in West Virginia.
Oh,
you can't let that go too long without having eyes on it.
Otherwise the whole house blows up.
How can you tell?
So on the originals,
you live in the woods and everything's a mess from all the murders that you can.
So on the originals, Disney Plus spent probably 150 to 200 million maybe on this season of The Mandalorian, and it's getting beaten out by a true crime documentary on Netflix that they slapped together about the Murdaugh murders. It's like, which probably cost nothing. It's like 3 episodes of Dateline worth of budget.
I mean, that maybe like the people in charge of the Mandalorian should have, just put a couple million towards some writers, and then it would have been a lot better.
1923 made the list the first time. That's the prequel to Yellowstone. It looks like that's because the season finale, I think that was the 9th episode. I think that was the season finale for that show. I haven't actually, I mean, people keep telling me how good it is, but I've never managed to get into Yellowstone. Either of you guys watch that one?
I have not.
Nope.
Yeah. Oh, look. Let me.
Your brahma's right here.
No one asked.
You asked like an hour and a half ago.
So that's the time delay that we get. That's what happens. He shows up to the movies with Mad that we do, but it's after we're done.
You're like, oh, where did everybody go? Guys?
He clicks into the StreamYards link and it's like, I guess there's nobody here.
And then I get credited on the show. No, 1923 is fantastic.
Yeah, so was that I guess the 9th episode was the season finale, because I think that was only 9 episodes.
Yep.
That's the one with Harrison Ford, right? And
Harrison Ford, Helen Mirren. Yeah.
Helen Mirren, yep. So yeah, that's the prequel that was, and I've heard good things about that. It was on Paramount Network for a long time, just regular TV. And so I feel like I'm like 3 seasons behind the original Yellowstone. What is it up to? 4th, 3rd, 4th, 5th season?
Maybe 5th or 6th.
Yeah. And
I think it's
like,
5th.
Sometimes I'm like, it's too much to try to go back and watch to catch up. And I'm just like, nope, I'm out. But what's good for Chris Rock over there, it's really hard for a comedy special to make this chart because there's, it's one, like one episode as opposed to a show. So it's pretty good for Chris Rock that it actually made this top 10 just off his, you can see one episode because it's the whole special. So good for him. That was the one where he was commenting about Jada being a terrible person and why was he getting in trouble for stuff she did.
Yeah, the response just short of a year later from the slap.
I still thought like he could have punched it up just a little bit more instead of just repeating like he's a bitch, like there was so much good material, and then when
the repetition is kind of Chris Rock's shtick, though.
Yeah, but it just felt like he could have done something just a bit better considering how witty he is, how like clever, especially with some of the other jokes.
Here you go, Yeti. I'll give you one that actually I thought was more on point. It was a meme I saw, and it was the picture of Tupac and Jada when they were going out, and it was like, look, Tupac did manage to dodge a bullet once. It made me laugh way harder than I should have, but it was like, yep.
No, that is pretty funny. That is very funny.
Oh, because Jada Pinkett's like, she has humiliated Will Smith time after time after time. I don't like. He's a
literal cuck.
Yeah, she did podcasts about it, like.
Oh yeah.
Talking about how I'm not in love with Will anymore, and I go and I do my thing, and it was just like, lady.
And then it's like right in front of him. Like he's sitting right there,
or he's the special guest on the episode.
yeah. So she's saying all of this in front of him. It like, wow, how are you with this woman?
So Chris Rock, I think I agree with Yeti. He probably could have done a lot harder material about that, but it's his choice how much he wants to do. But I
Yeah,
mean, what he did was funny, but I would have preferred a more Ricky Gervais, like I don't give a rat's ass about anything kind of attitude towards it.
I just thought he like took the gas off the pedal type of thing. Like he was really really cooking, and then when it's coming to like the final punchlines, it's just like, is a bitch, he's a bit, you know, that was it.
That was
When
almost something somebody says, Yeti. Took the gas off the pedal. Not took the foot off the pedal or put the foot on the gas.
you know what I mean.
Maybe Chris Rock in the middle of his punchline had a flashback about getting Jada's name out as MF in mouth.
Yeah.
So it gave him pause about that. So good for Chris Rock though for doing that. Acquired
A year later.
So the acquired chart on the Nielsen ratings is pretty much just all the licensed shows that the streaming services pick up. And Last of Us is weird because HBO, we've talked about this before, it counts as an acquired show for HBO Max because anything that airs on HBO is licensed to HBO Max. So that one dominated the acquired one, with NCIS coming in second, because that one's always usually number one on the acquired chart. Maybe Coco Melon or Bluey, which are right below it.
God, what is
well,
so
I mean, I
sad
like NCIS and always have, but I mean, it's basically the Matlock.
Yeah, but that's because you're
this
60,
next generation.
So.
Well, I'll tell you what, it's like my father. He's in his 70s. He will put that stuff on in the background and just let it roll all day.
Yeah, if there was a channel that only played CSI shows and NCIS shows, yeah, my dad would be all over it.
It reminds me, like Stars has a Stars Western channel where they play like Bonanza and all the old like 50s and 60s Western television shows. And it's like the only one that they haven't bothered putting into HD because there's no point.
Right.
Because the old people who watch this channel don't give a rat's ass about HD.
They can't see definition anyway.
And they're airing are shows from the 50s that weren't even standard definition anyway. So what does it matter? I'm just like, oh, as my father was like, where'd the Stars Western channel go? And I was like, Dad, you're in the HD section. you can't, it's not going to be there.
There is no such thing.
Oh, Grant's here. Hey, Grant, how are you? Thanks for coming. And so once he was just really happy I found it and put it on. It was the Virginian, and he's like, "Oh, I'll be watching this one." I was like, "I bet you will."
Followed by the Rifleman, followed by Bonanza, followed by Gunsmoke,
and followed by Maverick, like the old one. Like, which Maverick's gonna be? Is it Bert, or Brett? Like what? Oh, totally old. And what was which was it? Virginia one lasted like 20 plus seasons, and they're all on there, and just it's crazy.
Westerns, I literally don't know the shows that you're referring to at this point.
you never had a family member who just watched the old Western TV shows, or you saw them in syndication when you were a kid?
No, I don't know any of these that
I feel like TBS and TNT just lived off re-airing those on the early years when Turner had just first started them.
With the occasional Mr. Ed thrown in. And Beverly Hillbillies.
And some I Dream of Jeannie.
Yeah, anything that was black and white, or a portion of the show was black and white. They were all over.
All right, Gilligan's Island, I Dream of Jeannie. Which was better?
I like Gilligan's Island better.
Marianne or Ginger?
Marianne.
A guy who appreciates the trad wife.
Yeah.
Yeti, Marianne, or Ginger?
You guys are old.
They aired like constantly when we were kids.
And I'm only like 3 or 4 years older than you, aren't I, Yeti? Well, I know I'm 3 years older than Mad. I may be much older than you. I don't know.
I think Brahm and I are about the same.
Time
age.
hit you different than it hit me.
Yeah.
I feel like me
Well,
and Brahma
that
are
we're
both,
Americans, or I am.
oh, well, there you go. Grant has an opinion. Ginger was a whore. She was an
Yeah, she just
actress.
had nowhere to
So
work her
yes,
wares
yes,
there.
that is exactly correct. Well, there's a reason that Mr. Howell brought all that money on the trip for a 3-hour tour. And that's because
Yes, lovey.
you know what? I've realized, Ginger was basically Amaranth of the 1960s. she was
Right.
run, she was running the OnlyFans on Gilligan's Island.
The only show in town.
Here you go, Yeti. Time to Brahma like a bobsled hitting the ice. I
Grant,
don't
that's
know.
mean
I
to
don't
me.
think we don't. Plus, he enjoys hockey, ice hockey, and Yeti being Canadian has to know how to play ice hockey. It's required.
It's a law.
It's a
He's
lot,
better
like,
at curling, though.
well, I mean,
I'm really not.
do we
I
have
wouldn't
we
mind
asked?
playing though.
I'm intrigued to see if Mad would have any comment on thoughts on a sport where you have to sweep and who might have to do with that.
True.
Curling is only entertaining every 4 years during the Olympics. There's-
That's one women's sport I don't mind watching in the Olympics.
why are the girls in curling very attractive? It doesn't make sense. Like, you'd think that they, because it doesn't require you to be athletic.
It's because
No.
every guy is attracted to a girl who can clean, and they're professional sweepers.
Yeah, they always yell hard, 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 and sweeping them. I was like, I feel like this is a different kind of content.
Yep.
The only thing better in the Olympics is probably women's volleyball is a nice sport to watch.
Beach volleyball, yeah.
Oh no, regular volleyball.
Yeah.
I mean, they're built nice.
I'd agree.
Grant, because there's nothing hotter than a woman with a broom. Well, I mean, if you want your house taken care of, that's
I like the way this show works. Somebody comes into the chat, then they come onto the show. Then somebody magically appears in the chat after you leave the chat.
Did you like tag
Now
out
you
with
know how to
Grant
build
when you left,
your
Brahma?
build your base.
we're
Brahma, you
following
were like,
Grant's
hey
model.
man, I want to come on the chat, but they got nobody in the audience. Grant, come over and get in the audience.
Look, yeah, we are clearly doing this just as a side thing for fun. We have the real jobs that require, as Slender is working right now on the side, which is why he goes mute for minutes at a time.
I thought it was just because he didn't like Brahma and so didn't want to talk to him.
No, it's end of month, man. I just gotta make sure the metrics are good.
It is very end of month.
building your base one panelist at a time. Yeah, that's
Yeah.
correct. That's
Just send out the StreamYard link to a random person every week and be like, "Hey,
I'll just put it on Twitter and see what happens." Like whatever. No, it's we are following Grant's model because we have seen the light on the shorts, man. We got like more views, subscribers, and it's ridiculous. It was thousands compared to like 20s, 30s.
yeah,
I don't.
that's
I
cool."
don't know. I mean, YouTube's obviously pushing that, like it's their job, and I can monetize Slender's rants that way eventually. What is? I don't even.
When he isn't muted.
Yeah.
So
What is
Grant's going pimp.
Okay, it took me a second to put that together. Yeah, shorts. Everybody, shorts where that follow the lead of Mr. Grant Gregory. He does it better almost than anyone, seemingly. Because shorts will get you the numbers, get people to just watch them on repeat. You can do.
Yeah, soon Grant will be making millions off of his shorts, and then he'll work for all of us for free out of the kindness of his heart.
Oh, good for you to just volunteer grants. Yep. Shorts get you the views. That's what we found. It happened every time we put shorts up. They're doing well. Like even our worst one is at like 1,600 views. which doesn't sound like huge numbers, but for us, that's really good.
I mean,
that's always good.
Done? I mean, we got rookie numbers, man. We got to pump those numbers.
We got to pump this. Yeah, Grant's over there like 1,500. Piece of shit. You're nothing.
I wake up every morning and get 1,500 while I'm taking a shit.
In fact, I made a short about it. Flexing at Yeti. Yeti gets way more views than we do.
It's kind of funny that you say that, because that's typically the only place that I watch shorts is when I'm taking a shit. It's like when we were little and it was like, all right, there's nothing around. I guess the shampoo bottle I'll read for the 10,000th time. That's how shorts are for me now.
Oh God, don't you hate that too? Because it's like after a couple of really good, sessions, you've read everything in the bathroom, and you're like, I just wish the wife would change her shampoo again, because
Right.
I'm so sick of reading about Dove and how gentle it is on my fucking hair. I know.
Yeah, we're getting big time by Grant over here. My biggest video has 17 million views. Oh, okay. Yeah, I don't have a video that has 100,000 views, 10,000 views, whatever.
I mean, I've got a video that's got 100,000.
Yeah, that's why.
You know what? The views aren't what matters, okay? It's the heart, it's the dedication, it's the passion, and anything else that can't be quantified, because I don't want to know how much we suck.
Oh, well, the thing that really sucks about it is that
you should steal other people's content. That's part 2 of the secret.
Oh shit, it's almost at 200,000 now. But yeah, so it got hit by a copyright that I think is bullshit. I tried to fight it once, and then they denied that. So if I fought it again, and they denied it, it would go to like a court case. So off that video, I get nothing. My biggest video ever by a massive margin, because the next biggest one is not even at 10,000. And I get nothing from it.
We have the short that hit the biggest is Slender ranting about Scooby-Doo and Velma, right? And it got copyright struck. There's no audio at all. It's just clips like as he's ranting about the original Scooby-Doo. And
wait, that got copyright struck?
Yeah, they put a copyright strike on it.
You could fight that and it'll be gone right away.
No, yeah, I put in I put in a text-based rant that this is clear, fair use, transformative content. It's they can basically I did a text-based they can kiss my ass.
Here's the thing too, right? Like it's not even animated. There's just slides from the show.
Yeah.
And right on time, somebody else joined the chat.
Holy shit.
Hello.
Hello.
Grant,
Yeah.
Holy shit, somebody actually
before you
did. So this method literally works.
This is called building an audience one viewer at a time.
It is. Eventually, by this method, in a year, we'll have 100 views.
Just think, if you stream every day, that's the secret. Stream every day, and then you'll get a new panelist, a new person.
You're gonna run out of space real quick.
Yes, true.
And have to switch to Melon. Have the 12
like
spaces.
The internet enough to stream
Can you
every
work
day.
for Melon? God.
Yeah, they want you to read the name.
Am I all right? So I have Slender.
You want me to read that? Mr. Big Wig Majig AG Lig Vietnam Ham Jam Fig Stig.
So that's
There
just
you go.
Grant.
Man, rep's gone downhill quick, hasn't it?
This is not to say that it's Grant's fault, but I think we're probably going to be wrapping up. We're going almost 2 hours.
No, it's Grant's fault.
Is it?
Typically.
Well, I mean, he big
Yeah, you can blame me. That's fine.
He mentioned that he gets like 17 million views on his videos, and it made me kind of disappointed about even being on YouTube and wanting to quit.
Yeah, like
So,
what are we even doing?
what are we
here?
even doing here? Like, what's the point?
At the end of the day, that's my only goal.
To make you quit.
No,
Michael.
to dishearten the little people, the normies of YouTube.
Grant wants to shame all of the creators that might hire him off of YouTube.
I shall name and shame you all to leave. And you know it's gonna be like, yeah, that's terrible. You're just nothing. You're nothing. If you worked with me and paid me, you could be somebody. He's negging us into.
Have I told you about the secret part 3 yet?
Hey, Grant Gregory.
Get a weave.
It's the way to do it.
I mean, I'm well past having hair on my head, so I've come to peace with it. I think Brahma, you have too. So
Yeah.
we're probably okay.
I've lived longer without hair than I ever had hair.
Oh, hey, I forgot. That's the one thing I've got on all of you. Ha!
That's true.
I've got hair.
Yeah,
And
I
a
mean,
second asshole.
Yeti's covered
Yeah,
in
you
it.
don't count, Yeti.
He's got more hair, teeth, and buttholes than the rest of us combined.
Yep.
Oh, for the person
hold
that
on,
has
I'm gonna-
hair like Slender, he's got an avatar that's just bald.
So wait, hold on. I need to count how many hands and assholes Yeti has, but I'm doing the mad method, and I managed to not be able to keep track of my hands.
Don't look
to
at your
count.
fingers; they'll disappear.
Don't look at the finger. For anybody who missed that was one of the best parts that came
That was
out
really
of man, it was someone making an old phone call, and I was like, oh, this is like the early aughts. Not every place had area code, so it could have been 7 digits. And he's like, no, it was 4 and 3. That's not 7.
No, that's 9.
And then he goes, wait, I've lost track of my hands when I was
Yeah, because I stopped looking at my left hand. I forgot I had 3 on it, so I assumed I had 5. So then it turned into this running thing every time Mad doesn't look at something. I said that's the reason why his back doesn't hurt, because he never sees it. It doesn't exist.
It made me almost laugh and cry again when it actually came up in the video. I was like, oh my God, he didn't cut it.
It was too good to cut.
Yeah, plus I think it was referenced too many times.
Yeah, it was a lot of fun. It's a shame I missed out on the I left during the garbage pail assault scene.
Yeah.
The vacuum.
So on whose show? This was on
Yeah.
Mad Barber Entertainment. It's the movies with Mad, and this one was specifically Tartarus. If you watch the movies with Mad, watching Tartarus over at
Came
Mad
out
Barber
today.
It came out today, and it's hilarious.
Yeah, the sequel to it's called Retardarus.
Everybody just goes dead quiet. And Grant mutes because everybody's in the background right after saying it.
I was trying to come up with like what the subhead would be, like Retardarus, even tartar, but
They went full.
Never go full Tartarus.
Yeah.
Which was actually my rating on that episode.
Retardarus, Simple Jack.
Yeah.
Oh, this is fun.
some really good CG in that, though.
It's almost as good as MODOK in the MCU.
I was telling the wife about it, and I was like, do you remember Reptile from Mortal Kombat movies?
Imagine that looking high end compared.
I know, right?
That's what I said. I was like, Reptile was better than the CG in this movie.
It looked like the CG. Do you remember like the video for Blue, that really weird techno hip song
From Marvel
like
65.
yeah, from like around 2000? That was the
No,
like,
it was in the 90s.
Was it the 90s? Okay, so that was the CG they were using for this thing.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, guys, I got to dip because I'm crashing so hard.
Thanks for coming on, Yeti. It's been fun.
Yeah, thanks for inviting me.
Oh, yeah, so we're going on the other stream now, Yeti? Oh, shit. I said the loud part out loud. Sorry, never mind.
I couldn't even if I wanted to.
Yes, I too have to dip with your face.
Hold, how many panelists am I losing? Let me count on my hands here.
On the plus side, you might gain someone in the chat.
Yeah,
That's
that
true.
is true. And you'll be able to make room. Okay,
Test
I
out the
will see
theory.
you guys later because I'm going to pass out.
All right. Bye.
Later,
Okay.
Yeti.
Bye.
Well,
And then there
that
were
is-
4.
All right, so
It
let's
is-
talk about Picard.
Are you up for you actually up for
No, I'm
doing that
not.
now?
I
Okay.
was thinking we were wrapping up.
Yeah, we're at 2 hours. It's a good long good show. But it's just we actually had panelists jump on, so it's different for us. So we kept going for a while. Whatever. Usually we're just talking to each other. It's fine.
Well,
No, I'm laughing at
that's how it
Grant.
goes.
We got a new person in the chat.
Oh, those Jones. Hopefully they'll leave comments and not spam people. All right. Well, anything
All
you
right.
wanted to say, Slender, on the way out today?
No, I'm good.
Brahma, Grant, you guys want to say anything, or you guys were just coming hanging out? But you promote whatever
Yeah, no,
you want to
I'm-
our massive viewer.
Yeah, no, thanks for having me on. It's ever since I've been on this show, it's it's been an up and down roller coaster. I've laughed, I've cried, I've came. It's it's been great. I usually do that, but in the reverse order. So
And I just came on to have fun, so thank you guys.
You guys are always welcome. It's good times. All right, guys. Well, thanks for coming to the viewers who may actually have watched this, who aren't any of the panelists tonight. This was the Ascendant Art Podcast. We'll be back next week, and eventually we'll try to get to the Picard review. We've been trying to do that a couple weeks. So thanks for coming, guys, and we'll see you later. Bye.
Night.
peace.
Bye.